Hello and welcome to Mooks and Monsters. I'm Rob Ward.
And I'm Tim Niederreiter, and this is episode 125 of the podcast.
And today we will be talking about social etiquette and social cues in the game world. Now, recently I was in California, and getting to California from Minnesota, I'd had to go to a couple of airports, actually. A big airport in Phoenix and a small one in California. Now, when you're in an airport, you don't act like a you don't act like you would at home or in um like just lounging about. Sure, yeah, you might get tired, but there's stuff that you definitely cannot say. There are places you cannot go. There is a certain attitude you are expected to take with the people who work there and those who are making sure you travel. You don't mouth off to the TSA, for example. You don't scream bomb. Just like when you're in a theater, you don't talk during the show, you don't use your cell phone, and you don't scream fire. However, when we're in an RPG setting, and the world might be different, it might be a little off, sometimes players, including myself, fall into social faux pas. And as game masters, it's up to us to make sure that the players understand what is acceptable in a location and what is not.
Yeah, and by acceptable, we don't mean stuff that they're actually not allowed to do. It's more like in the game you could do this, but there will be consequences. Just like in real life for talking in a theater or yelling bomb in an airport. You know, I mean, as long as they understand that there are going to be consequences and what the gist of those consequences, that's basically what we're getting at here. Managing the expectations of what's allowed by the society.
Yes, and it really does come up in fantasy and sci-fi mostly.
Mm-hmm.
These accidental faux pas, which you could use it to your advantage because if you're meeting a weird race of aliens that you've never met before, and you start doing things, and they start glaring at you like you just insulted their mother, that gives some color, that gives some juiciness to the plot. But if you are, part of the world and your character has been expected to, go into these places, what are some tactics that we can use to make sure that we don't fall into those faux pas?
Yeah, I think as game masters, we need to communicate the kind of the style, the feel of a situation. For example, a high class party, you're going to do one sort of thing, or versus a bar scene, where you might get in a fight and it might not be a big deal, might not be a huge deal anyway. Probably somebody's going to try to kick you out if that happens. Depends on the place, right? But the thing is, it's all about what the players know and how well they understand what's going on there. And I think it's communication at its most basic, right?
Absolutely.
But you also don't want to drop a ton of exposition on the player characters because that's just boring. You don't need to. I find primers could be useful for this kind of thing. And actually, now that I think about it, a kind of this is something I've never included in a primer before, but I think next time I might try it. Where if I want a game, kind of like our triumvirate game from the space opera thing that we played. If I wanted a game where you could be in all sorts of different kinds of scene, I might want a shorthand for telling you what kind of scene this is, so other people can expect from you. So I would have a primer where it would have 3 or 4 different kinds of scene that are going to be common in the game, and then some kind of description of what would be expected of a character there.
Mm-hmm. I would find in a primer, maybe not like a shorthand of a scene, personally, laws or a rule like a charter. If you're going into some weird town, you could totally have. I mean, Animal Farm did a great job of establishing what the rules are, and then as they diverted from the original rules, and they would go out and the rules were painted.
Yeah.
Differently.
Yeah, they get replaced and some rules get superseded, that kind of thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I think that's way better actually than what I was suggesting. I think the idea of having basically having an in-game idea of what NPCs are going to value, the way they're going to and how much they're going to value different things
Yeah.
is really really cool.
Yeah, just some notes like uh, this sort of magic is seen as anathema.
Mm-hmm.
It's generally not um, appropriate to use spells in a building. Um,
Yeah, reading people's minds with your psychic abilities because so many people have them. People know you're going to do it. It's considered improper, that kind of thing.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, um, like it's totally. And on the other hand, it's like, oh, it's totally fine to use a teleportation um, activity if you're in at a party to say goodbye.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Or you might even have and in different classes of people, you could also have that kind of detail of like, this is what's
a
expected.
class system, yeah.
When this is what's expected at the high class party versus the bar kind of thing. And what actions are just always inappropriate, of course. That's well worth noting for your players early on. And I do think having a handout of this kind of thing would be really a good idea if the players are I mean, and it might be a single page, it might be half a page or a note card size thing. That might be all you need in a fantasy or science fiction setting, but definitely try to get that across as early as possible and allow the players to reference it, because then that's kind of another tool set that they can use. It's all like another set of rules, like as real as the rules in the game books,
Mm-hmm.
and they can exploit stuff like that as long as it's clear they know what they can do and what they can't do.
Yeah. You mentioned something very fascinating with class, and especially in Victorian England, this was a big issue. Um, like because there was the upper class, the middle class, and the lower class, and you're there were certain things you could and could not say to someone that was above you.
Mm-hmm.
You were in India for a month, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been a while.
Did you see a lot of the Caste System in action there?
I heard more about it than I saw.
Okay.
I didn't notice a lot of people. I mean, granted, they do it. We did go to the Hindu baths at one point, and the Hindu baths are divided by the caste. So the people at the top, and originally, at least, I'm not sure if this is still true. I don't actually remember, but originally in the old Hindu baths, the people on the top would bathe in the water, and then that water would flow down to the lower levels, and the next step would bathe in it, and the next, and so on. That means the people who were bathing at the bottom were not really getting clean, were they?
No.
Because they're bathing in wastewater
Mm-hmm.
from like 6 other castes of people. So yeah, and I know a fair amount about the caste system, but things like how the only ones, and actually this is kind of interesting because the only people in that society who are allowed to touch like cow dung, actually I think any kind of manure or poop, are the Untouchables, because they're considered unclean anyway. And
sure, yeah.
it's kind of, I think it's kind of gross, not to get too political, but and that's not, most of our listeners won't be hearing this in India, so I think it's kind of nasty. But the thing is, it's also a necessary job, and that's why it's kind of weird that there's so much. But that's what societies always do. They put value on different things. Like, yeah, I mean, you're not allowed. You can't even kill a cow in India, right? And the Hindus won't kill cows. They won't eat cows, and so they're going to have cows around because they keep them anyway, and they don't drive them away or anything. They keep domestic cows, and they don't do much with them, as far as I can tell, and therefore there has to be somebody to clean up after them. But nobody else in society will do it, or at least classically speaking. I'm not sure if it's still quite.
Now that's fascinating. Because isn't the rat catcher also a untouchable job as well?
I'm pretty sure it is. Yes.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of these jobs that are very important on a basic level, right? But they're not high status.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually a lot of stuff like that out there, though. janitors. It's an important job.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But it's looked down upon for some reason.
And another one is, in a lot of societies, there aren't like America. I mean, the current United States, teachers are not super well privileged or anything,
Yeah.
But they're that job is super important. Maybe even more than the waste removal,
Well, I mean, here's as someone that actually was in both of those positions, I used to clean out parking lots, and also I used to be a paraprofessional.
Mm.
Um, yeah, it totally, it's very necessary. It's definitely needs to be done. Um, However, in this, country where it's much more about where we have this very strong Protestant meritocracy work ethic going on, it's not looked as down upon as it would in some other places.
Mm.
Um, and so it's just amazing because you can like establish. I think that's also very important, establishing like the social like structure, whether that
Yeah.
is based on like say we're playing D&D and we have the elves at the very top followed by humans, and then at the bottom are dwarves and orcs.
Right, that's an interesting, and even most D&D would not make it like as say it the way you did, but that's what you said was very interesting. Where the elves are the highest class, humans are in the middle, and then we got these kind of barbaric races at the bottom. And
Mm-hmm.
if you have multiple races in a game world, that's the kind of thing that's really worth thinking about. Is how do they see each other? How do they integrate with each other? And do they have? And they could even have their own sets of manners and stuff if they're living on their separately. Every culture can be different, right? But I
Mm-hmm.
also think they should be influenced. That's the other thing. I wouldn't say. I think it's kind of dangerous in a game, and maybe even a little unrealistic. It can be cool as a contrast, but it's risky perhaps to have cultures that are too different from each other right next to each other, unless there's like a big call to it. Like if you cross the border here, now saying I mean now you can't touch you can't work on the Sabbath. Say that's a good idea. Here's one: if you cross the border, it's on Sunday or something,
Mm-hmm.
or Saturday, I guess, whatever. You and then you cross the border, and now no one else around there is allowed to do anything because of what day it is. But on the other side of the border, business is roaring.
Oh, that's actually very fascinating. You know
Uh,
what? When you mentioned like two different cultures right next to each other.
mm-hmm.
That reminds me a lot of when I went to New York. I have family out there, so I've been there quite a few times. And there is, geez, what's this? It's not Mott Street. But I think it's Mulberry Street. Yeah, Mulberry Street in Manhattan. You on one side of it, you look around. It's Little Italy,
Mm-hmm.
and you see all these Italian stores, all these restaurants, all these different things. Everyone around you looks Italian, and you like you go like a couple of blocks down, and then everyone around you is Asian, and you realize, oh, I'm in Chinatown now. And so I feel like something like that, because New York is still very much that area. It was even more so back in the day.
Yeah.
But you had the Irish neighborhood, you had the Korean neighborhood, you had the Japanese neighborhood, black neighborhoods, um,
And so forth. Yeah, there's tons
yeah,
with all the different colonial groups kind of grouping together.
hmm
All the groups from different places, or immigrants, I guess I should say.
yeah. Because when you're like new in a place, you want to kind of. That's why in Minnesota, this is a little bit of an example here.
Yeah,
Native Minnesotans tend to hang out with other Minnesotans. People that are not from Minnesota tend to hang with other expats.
yeah. Like we have some pretty big immigrant communities from say Somalia
Hmm.
and Tibet. Even we have one of the bigger Tibetan populations in the Twin Cities area. But anyway, yeah, not to get too specific, but
Hmm.
there's a lot of these, and these groups are very different from each other in their what they expected, what politeness means to them, kind of thing,
Hmm.
at the very least.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
and but I also think there's an important thing from a game perspective is you should really I think it's really important to make clear to your players if there's something strange in your world, or if some rule is not to be broken. For example, I think I did. I mean, in the Triumvirate game, in the big space opera game, uh, nobility was like you never kill other nobility, never. And
Hmm.
you guys, and I think I got that across you guys pretty well, pretty quickly. At least, I mean, unless you never kill nobility from your own space nation, basically, unless and there's no unless actually. If you ever
Hmm.
do it, even if they're a criminal, well, now you're a criminal, and that did happen. At least twice, you guys did that. One time, you got away scot free. That was toward the end of the campaign. because no one ever found out, presumably. But the other one was a very obvious move because the admiral got so pissed off that he just chopped this guy's head off. And that was, he chopped one of his enemies to, killed one of his enemies. And even though the guy was, they eventually were able to reanimate him through various methods. It was like, well, that's still wrong, dude. You don't just go around killing people, destroying their body and stuff. Yeah. So, because these people are all high class, but I don't think I used it as a gotcha, but it was something the guy was relying on to shield himself, this enemy, this villain.
Well, what's and it was really cool funny about that?
Yeah, go on. Yeah, sorry.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but during that time, I never knew that rule existed. I knew there was like, I came across it as I shouldn't be killing other nobles because this might start a war. But I did not know that was like a social faux pas. It kind of fell into that because I realized, if we start killing other nobles, that's going to destabilize the system that's already very kind of this confederacy that's already very loose.
Yes.
Yeah. So
yeah, but it was a rule that you all followed kind of implicitly, and that's why it was a pretty easy rule to get across, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if and I'm not sure if it probably was one that kind of grew as I developed the setting during play. But I remember, and actually, I'm pretty sure you also missed this session. That was like in the middle of the first season of the game. First semester we played that game was when the admiral killed that guy. And I think you might have not been there for that session or the next one or something, and that's maybe why it didn't stick with you. But it was definitely. It was definitely, I think, and that because there was another one where he was on trial shortly after that. He actually went and got tried by a judge. It was an interesting situation. But that was not it. We didn't actually play that scene. He just kind of like slap on the wrist because he made sure the guy didn't actually get destroyed. He just kind of didn't. He was just so pissed that he killed him anyway. Anyway, that's a kind of complicated scenario as far as he killed this guy, but he made sure he could bring him back. So it's silly. But anyway, that kind of thing, though, you don't want to use it as a gotcha. Like I said, I think you don't want to surprise your players with a rule that they don't know about, and that because that'll be frustrating. That's like railroading, and it'll come off as contrived.
Oh yeah, totally. I would also venture to say, with having these social cues and these social expectations laid out. Because I know there's been several times where I've tried to do something and people are like, what? No, you can't do that here. And it's like, why not? And, it just was not explained. I would, going back to the primer, like remember when I ran the first Mafia game? What's the first thing I did before we even started playing, before we even started creating characters?
Oh, but I do not remember. It's been too long. What did you do?
I had a PowerPoint.
Oh, yeah.
And I told you, like, just gave everyone like a basic rundown of how Mafia life works, especially in the 20s. Because I remember asking the table, okay, you remember that scene in The Godfather? And everyone was like, nope. I was like, what? What about Goodfellas? Nope. What? All right. Hold on, I got the PowerPoint. And because again, that was my that was also kind of a little differential thing in culture, because in Illinois, like pretty much everyone watches The Godfather, and especially in Chicago, and because we have such a rich mob history, and Minnesota has it too, with the Irish gangs and the Jewish gangs, but
not quite the same thing, of course.
Yeah. It wasn't on the scale because it was a sanctuary city where people went and hid out. St. Paul was a sanctuary city where people went and hid out.
So I didn't even know that. I'm still pretty ignorant of mafia stuff.
Yeah, but it's totally expectable. This is why I felt so much that I had to explain how things in the mafia worked. How things in gangs in the 1920s worked. What an initiation looked like. What, why you don't mouth off to someone that's bigger than you. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And that's the kind of thing that, I mean, yeah. And even though that's not a fantasy setting, it's very similar, because if people aren't familiar with that particular subculture,
Mm-hmm.
then then you need to make sure they're going to be familiar. Like, that's the whole game right there, almost. That's most of the actual gameplay, and the role playing comes from what you can and can't do in this context. And so this is really a backbone for any game, regardless of system. Another good one, I mean, go to D&D, where, the players can be described often as murder hobos or heavily armed homeless in a slightly
Mm-hmm.
more euphemistic sense. But that, like, why are they allowed to carry weapons around? Like, I mean, I guess if it's a savage world, like, to use the name of another RPG, but anyway, if it's a world full of, savagery and violence, well, that's a thing. I mean, that's something to keep note of. I mean, it's not every world is like that, so it's
Mm-hmm.
important to keep note of, and not every place in every world is the same. So that's basically the bottom line here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about those expectations, and yeah, making it clear, like, all right, because of course in RPGs people grab all the guns, and it's just like, okay, yes, you're in an active war zone, so it makes sense that you have guns. Or no, you're a known criminal, and if you're caught walking around with a gun without a permit, you're going to jail, and the cops are going to be pulling you over for numerous times, being like, hey, you, what do you got in your pocket there? It's like, ah, shit.
Yeah.
So making those expectations clear, making those those laws known to the players, and not um, not hitting them with rules
Don't hit them with a
automatically.
gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah, don't hit them with a gotcha, unless it's a location or a culture or a species that is totally alien.
Yeah. Unfamiliar to the character. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And they do something, and that's how you like advance a plot.
Right. I think I mean, that can be fun, obviously. And also, if the characters are learning something for the first time, it's fine if the players are also learning it for the first time. That's probably for the best. So that's how I
Absolutely.
see it. Yeah. Anyway, anything else you want to add on this topic, Rob?
No, I think I've kind of. I hope I have made my point here,
Yeah, I think
because
we summed it up pretty well. You did a good
yeah,
job there. All righty.
I've been just this is important to me because I've been caught in a lot of these things in numerous games, and it's just like, well, it would have been nice if someone told me that I was not supposed to do that,
Yeah.
because as a character that has lived and breathed in this world his entire life, I should have known something.
Right. And it provides context. It gives a good feel to the game, too. It can really help, just sink the players into a setting. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, this has been of Mooks and Monsters. You can find us at mentalcellarpublications.com. Email us at podcast@mentalcellarpublications.com. We'd love to hear your questions, comments, concerns. You can find both of us on Twitter. I'm at StageHat. Tim's at TNeedAWriter. Look for us on Facebook, and we've been hosted by Lipson.
Thanks for listening, everybody.